There's one other small, but in my opinion, very confusing aspect of work from the energy viewpoint. Well, it's very confusing at first, but it's actually extremely simple once you get the hang of it. And that is figuring out whether work is going to be positive or negative conceptually. Um, so let's talk about how you can figure that out. So when is the work done on an object positive? And the answer, we already know what the answer is from the force viewpoint. It has to do with the directions of the force vectors and the object's displacement and everything. But in the energy viewpoint, what you would say is that work done on an object is positive if energy is flowing into the object's kinetic energy. Remember that work is a flow of energy, is a transfer of energy. So what we're saying here is that if the transfer is into the object's kinetic energy, then the work done on the object is positive. And conversely, work done on an object is negative if energy is flowing out of the object's kinetic energy. Okay, now that sounds very simple, right? Why did I say that this was a confusing point? Is because there's actually some subtleties about the wording here, which I have so far swept under the rug, which just drives students crazy. I think I was studying work for probably 2 or 3 years before someone actually told me that the wording is extremely important here. Namely, let me make 2 other statements which are totally true. The work done by an object is positive if energy is flowing out of the object's kinetic energy, and work done by an object is negative if energy is flowing into the object's kinetic energy. Okay, so in other words, the wording here is extremely important of whether you're trying to find the work done on an object by something else, or if you want to know the work done by an object on something else. In other words, what we're saying here is that because of conservation of energy, whenever you think about a transfer of energy, transfers go both ways. You can either view a transfer as being a transfer of energy in to object 1, or you can think of it as being a transfer out of object 1 into object 2. Like, for instance, if I use my bank account analogy again, I can say that, you know, if I get paid by my work, you know, Temple University loses money just as the same as I gain money. So if you're looking at my bank account, you would say that the amount of money I gained was positive. But if you're looking at Temple's bank account, then they actually lost money because Temple loses the same amount of money that I gain when I get paid. So if you're asking for, you know, is the amount of money that I make in my paycheck positive or negative? It's positive, of course, but is the amount of money Temple makes due to my paycheck positive or negative? It's actually negative, right? So let me give you like a more physicsy example. Why don't we take the example that we were doing before? So we were talking before about the initial state is I have this block here at rest, and then the final state is I lift it up to a certain height like that, and it's at rest again. And we showed in a previous video how the final result of this situation, let me just sketch it out really quickly, just to make sure people know what I'm talking about. So my initial state was this. My final state was this. In both cases, it's at rest. So what we showed in previous video was that the total work done here is the change in kinetic energy, which is 0, but that's because the work done by me is positive and the work done by gravity is negative and if you add them together, you get 0. And we kind of already showed this in a previous video, but let me show you how that makes conceptual sense with this viewpoint. Is why don't we start with the work done by me? When I lift up the block, is the amount of energy I'm doing on the block positive or negative? And the answer is it's positive, because when I lift the block, I'm putting energy into the block. So that would be the first case here. The work done by me would fall into this first category. The work done by me on the block is positive because my energy is going into the block. I am pumping energy into the block. But the work done by gravity would fall into the second category here. Because gravity, when I lift it up, gravity is actually removing the kinetic energy and storing it as potential energy. So as a result, the work done by gravity is negative because gravity is actually pumping the energy out of the kinetic energy. So then what's happening here, if you think about, so here's the object's kinetic energy. What's happening here is I am putting energy into the kinetic energy, and then gravity is putting it out of the potential energy. You can even say it's going into the gravitational potential energy here. And so you see how the work done by me, the arrow is in this direction, in to the kinetic energy, but the work done by gravity, the arrow is coming out of the kinetic energy. So that's why the signs work out the way that they do. Now, everything I just said was assuming that we're interested in the work done on the object. And like if you go back to the previous videos where I talked about this, you should find, if I was being careful about what I was saying, that I always said the work done on the block, the work done on the object, which is usually what you're interested in, the work done on an object, but not always. Sometimes you might encounter a question, like for instance, you might have exactly the same question here, but the question might say, how much work was done by gravity during this process? And you have to stop for a second and go, wait a minute, what's it actually asking? The work done by gravity would mean the work done by gravity on the object. So the work done by gravity is the same as the work done on the object because gravity is doing the pumping and the block is kind of the, you know, inert thing here. You always kind of like, when you view these interactions, you think basically about, it's always an exchange between two things. You kind of think of one of them as being like the active participant and one of them as being kind of the passive participant, which is being acted on. So if I'm interested in the work done by gravity or the work done on the object, those are the same because gravity is active and the block is passive. If I were to flip that around, you wouldn't normally say the work done on gravity. Normally you would say like the work done by the object on the earth, for example. That one's a little bit confusing, but let's go to the other one. The work done by me on the block is positive. The work done by the block on me is actually negative. You'd have to flip the sign around because if you're interested in the work done on me, now I'm the system. And so now when you view this very same arrow, now this arrow is going out of me, okay? Because this one over here, this represents the block, this box. And the blue block represents me. So basically, the work done by me on the block is positive. The work done by the block on me is negative. You see? So that's the main thing I wanted to address here. This might be a little bit confusing getting started, but the main thing I wanted to address here is to pay attention to that, first of all, because I didn't even realize when I was taking a course like this that you even had to read that carefully. I didn't even realize there was a difference. So that's the first thing, is to, whenever you're being asked to calculate work, stop for a second, reread the question, and see there's no such thing as just calculating work. That doesn't make any sense. You have to say, are you calculating the work done on this, by something else, on something else? What are you talking about? And there are certain fields where this distinction becomes very important and very confusing, like the next big section that we'll do. So pay attention to that wording. Does it say by or on? And pay attention to which direction is the energy flowing. If the energy is flowing in the direction it should be flowing for that wording, it's positive. If the energy is flowing opposite of the direction that you would expect from the wording, then the work done is negative. That's my main point.